With that being said, I think we'll turn it over to Ricky. The AIDS Committee of Toronto, about 3 years ago, decided that they were going to implement Totally Outright, and so Ricky is going to tell us a little bit of that story.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Ricky Rodrigues, and I am the Totally Outright support worker at the AIDS Committee of Toronto. I graduated from the Totally Outright program in Toronto in June of 2012 and started working for the program in November of 2012, and I'm currently completing my second contract with the program. So I'm here today to talk to you a bit about Totally Outright in Toronto, how it came to Toronto, and how it's evolved over time. And as you'll probably see, and as I'll probably mention, there's been quite a bit of overlap in terms of what's happened in Vancouver and what's happened in Toronto, but also some unique characteristics about the programs that are worth noting. So, how did Totally Outright come to Toronto? Well, very much like the case in Vancouver, we started by conducting an environmental scan of the field and looked at what was out there for young gay and bi men. And we noticed that there was a huge gap in sexual health services in particular for young gay and bi men. And this was particularly distressing for us because in Toronto, when we look at the epidemiological data for HIV, it's actually that the majority of new infections are among young gay and bi men. So it's important that we have an intervention that targets these men because they're considered at risk. So after acknowledging this gap and seeing this particular need for an intervention for young gay and bi men, we began to look around to see what was out there, what was being done for young gay and bi men in North America. And one of the programs that really stood out for us was the Totally Outright program in Vancouver. And this program stood out for us for a number of reasons. It was a successful evidence-based intervention. The evaluation that was being conducted on the program produced very strong data about its success, and this really stood out to us. We also noted that the program had been around in Vancouver since 2005, and we were looking at implementing the program around 2010, 2011. So to see that this program had been going on for so long and had been successful for such a long period of time was really a proof of its success as a program and as an intervention. We also really appreciated the holistic and strengths-based approach that was applied in the program, the way that it looked at gay and bi men's health in terms that weren't entirely focused on sexual health, but also looked at things like mental health, body image, and other factors that affect young gay and bi men. And the focus on resilience, or the unapologetic nature of the program that Jody was speaking about earlier, that was something that we also really appreciated and was very much in line with some of the values and aspects of our mission statement at ACT. But the biggest proof of success of the program, and the thing that stood out the most for us, was the graduates of the program that we were coming in touch with. My manager at ACT, Duncan McLaughlin, came to the BC Gay Men's Health Summit in 2010, I believe, and he said that seeing so many young gay and bi men at this summit who had graduated from Totally Outright, those graduates were living proof of the success of the program, and it was them who inspired him to come back to Toronto and proposition the different funding sources to potentially bring this program to Toronto. So how has Totally Outright evolved in Toronto over time, or since 2010, when the idea of bringing it to Toronto first came about? So let's start with funding. Very much like the case in Vancouver, we, in our initial funding proposals, did an assessment of the field, highlighted those gaps that were mentioned earlier. We drew from the research, which heavily came from the results of the Vancouver program. We also began to work quite closely with our funders. So as many of you know, those funding applications are quite dense and very vague, but speaking one-on-one with funders was really helpful for making those clarifications. So for example, we found about this time last year that there was a difference in priorities in terms of who's more likely to get funded for one of the programs that we get funding from. And gay men are considered a priority population in Toronto, so most programs that go through this funding source that are for gay men end up getting funding, whereas youth programs are, I believe they fall under a priority too. So they also get, the majority of them get funded, but the success rate might not be as high. So we decided over time to transition from, referring to our program as a program for gay youth to a program for gay men. And this also reflected the fact that our cross-section of young men that we promote the program for, it is quite broad. For our program, we tailor it to guys who are 18 to 29 years old. So they are definitely young gay men, and not necessarily gay youth, and it tends to fall in line with how they identify themselves. And of course, over time, as we've been able to collect data on the successes of our program, we've been able to use our own evaluation data to show what impact we've been having on our participants. In terms of planning and organization, as mentioned earlier, our program takes place about 2 to 3 times a year. This is actually the first time, or the first year, where we're going to be offering the program 3 times. But for the most part, when organizing the program, we try to work within a 4-month frame. So for the first 2 months, we do intensive recruitment. So that includes a number of different things, which I'll talk about shortly. After doing recruitment for 2 months, we begin an intake process, or in between that time, we begin that intake process, which is also a very comprehensive process that involves getting a bunch of relevant information from our participants in order to make sure that their experience is made quite accessible within the program. So I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. After those 2 months of recruitment, our program takes place over 4 Saturdays. So rather than 2 weekends, we split the 40 hours over 4 Saturdays. And we do this for a number of reasons. 2 reasons in particular, though, are worth noting. The first one is it gives us more time to implement feedback from participant evaluations on an immediate and ongoing basis. So at the end of each day of the program, we collect all of our anonymous evaluations from our participants, find out what they thought about the day, and pinpoint any particular needs that have come up within that day. And we do whatever we can to implement those for the next week of the program so that their needs are being met on an ongoing basis. But also having the program over 4 Saturdays gives our participants more time to interact with each other, to sort of breathe in between the program, and to build those relationships which we consider so important. And then in the last month of the program, or the last month of that sort of 4-month span, what we do is we compile all of our evaluation data, summarize it, and then use those summaries for writing recruitment reports, funding reports, and so on. Now, our Community Advisory Committee is an important part of this entire planning process. This is a group of people who are members of the community, graduates of Totally Outright, volunteers at ACT who are interested in developing the program. As mentioned previously, one of our first advisory committee members was Johan, a graduate from the Vancouver program of Totally Outright, and it was very helpful to have that insight, especially when we were just starting out the program. There are also a few other folks in this room who have been on that committee, and it's been great to have your insight as well. So going back to recruitment, recruitment is a very important part of our program, which is why we try to give 2 months to recruitment, 2 months for intensive recruitment. And we use a number of different recruitment techniques so that we reach as a diverse group of young men as possible. So that includes, distributing flyers, postcards, and other print materials, engaging in cross-promotion with other organizations and other service providers at ACT, doing online and print ads. The 2 biggest techniques for recruitment that we've had success with, though, have been social media and face-to-face recruitment. Social media, more specifically referring to Facebook recruitment, which is sort of where the image on the screen comes from. That's a thumbnail that we use to post in different Facebook groups to promote the program, to get folks interested in registering for it. And then face-to-face recruitment involves going to those community spaces where young gay and bi men are, going to campuses and universities and student events, going to community centers, and just talking with the guys one-on-one, or if we have the opportunity, actually conducting a presentation sort of like this to tell them about what we do and why they should consider getting involved with us. Once we finish recruitment, we conduct our intake process, which is also a very comprehensive process. So we have an online intake form or registration form, which has a number of questions about participants, how they identify, what are their dietary needs or restrictions, if they how they identify in terms of gender identity, how they identify in terms of their HIV status, more specifically if they've been recently diagnosed, because we've had participants who have come into the program after having been diagnosed with HIV, and we include all of these questions so that we can ensure that they have the best time in the program as possible. So it's all about meeting their needs and making sure that they feel safe and comfortable and are able to participate. In the first few times we ran the program, we didn't do intake interviews, which is something that the Vancouver has been doing since, I believe, the very beginning. And one of the reasons why we didn't do this is because we thought that it might potentially impede participation. We thought that it might seem cumbersome or intimidating for participants, so we decided not to do the intake interviews. But earlier this year, we started implementing them, and we found that they were very important for continuing to do some of the things that we were already doing, like ensuring safety, accessibility, and inclusion, but also for getting more information about recruitment strategies, for example, to really clarify where participants are hearing about the program from, but also to ask them information about their preferred learning styles so that we can tailor our learning modules to their specific learning needs and abilities. So once we've recruited our participants, we've got them through the intake process, we begin actually facilitating the program. And we conduct those various learning modules over the 4 Saturdays. We do them at ACT, it's the organization itself, as a way of getting participants introduced to the space, to the resources and the programs in the agency. And we cover a number of different learning modules, some of which, or the majority of which, come from the Vancouver model of Totally Outright. There are a few that I would particularly want to address because they've changed quite a bit over time and reflect sort of the diverse needs of the young men who come through our program. The first one is our coming out session. This is a session that we usually do on our first day, and over time this session has changed into a session on identities, because we're finding that more and more men who come through our program are really challenging this idea of coming out or the process of coming out, acknowledging how in many ways, or for many people, it's a very white Western experience, and that doesn't necessarily apply to all of our participants. Another thing that we've done from the very beginning is we've included a strong emphasis on public speaking. Public speaking is a core leadership skill, and in order to ensure that participants are developing this skill, we do a learning module on the first day about public speaking, and then participants are given multiple opportunities to practice that skill by, for example, introducing faculty members or speakers who come in, and then by their team presentations. We changed our pause prevention session, so rather than doing a separate session on pause prevention, we've decided to incorporate pause prevention all throughout our program. And we've done this as a way of avoiding isolating the HIV positive guys who tend to participate in our program. We still, however, have a session on living with HIV, so that we do give as much attention as possible to those unique experiences that are very important to acknowledge. And a few other things that we've changed in terms of our sexual health learning modules. Rather than doing HIV/AIDS 101 sessions, sometimes we change those sessions because we find that, like the Vancouver program, we tend to attract very high-functioning gay guys, guys who are already involved in sexual health or learning about it from different areas. So rather than doing a 101 session, we do an update session to give them information that they might not necessarily get from a 101 session. Also, over the years, we've began to introduce a careers in sexual health session for the young men, because we're finding that as they go through the program, more and more of them are becoming interested in careers in sexual health, and we want to link them with people who are in the field already so that they can pursue those careers further. So as I mentioned, at the end of each day of the program, our participants complete their evaluation packages. Now, they're actually given these packages at the beginning of the day, and we ask them earlier in the morning to go through that package and complete any of the before questions. By before questions, I mean that we use pre and post session measures. So some of those are written up on the PowerPoint. We'll ask participants how they felt or how much knowledge they had about something before participating in the learning session. And then at the end of the day, they can go and complete the after questions. And of course, these aren't the most robust measures, and there could be room for some bias, but it's a way of us for understanding how participants feel they have grown as a result of their participation in the program, how much knowledge they've developed as a result. So in addition to those pre and post measures, we also have a section for qualitative feedback, which is separate from the pre and post session measures, which are much more quantitative. So it allows these evaluations and how they are structured in this way that this allows us to get a really rich amount of feedback from our participants, which we can then compile and use to change the program along the way, but also include in funding reports and so on. So, I've talked a bit about the process and the program itself, but what are the outcomes or the results that we've seen in Toronto? There are three particular impacts that I would like to acknowledge, and the first one is capacity building. So, we strongly encourage participants to take the skills that they've learned in the program and apply them in the real world. And we encourage them to do this in a number of ways by, for example, becoming volunteers with the AIDS Committee of Toronto, by joining our Community Advisory Committee, by becoming faculty members so that they can come back and facilitate some of the learning modules. And a lot of them have done this. These are just two examples of graduates from the first generation. So on the left side, or the left image, that's Maverick. He's a graduate from the first series of Totally Outright, and Victor on the right is a graduate from the latest or most recent series, which happened in May. There's also professional development, which is a huge part of our program. And yes, that's me. So, one of the biggest ways that we engage our participants in professional development is by having them become employees of the program. So we have about 4 positions available for our graduates, and yes, they are open only to graduates. There's only been one person who's done a peer worker position who wasn't a graduate, and that's because they were working for the program before it was actually started, or before the first time it was offered. But ever since then, the programs have been open only to graduates in order to further develop their capacities and their professional skills. And we also try to engage participants in professional development by, once again, linking them to experts or professionals in the field, not just in sexual health, but also in other careers as well. We've noticed that participants tend to be interested in many different areas, and if we have those connections, we try to link them to different folks who have careers that they're interested in. And then one of my favorite and most important impacts about the program is the community building aspect of it. So the friends that people make, and we've really noticed the community building impact in this past series of Totally Outright, which happened in May, where a lot of the young men who went through the program ended up going on to create their own Facebook group page and have been using that as a forum to continue to engage with each other since their graduation, and to also arrange outings for them to do together. So where do we go from here? Well, of course, we could always use a bit more funding, especially because we want to see Totally Outright move towards an entirely peer-run program. The majority of our funding now goes towards the payments that the graduate peer workers receive. So it would be great to have more money to do that, but also to invest in the program more broadly. We also want to see our graduates continue to grow and build community with each other, which is why we host events like a regular reunion and recruitment party, which we host before each series of the program, so that we can get participants together again, but also encourage them to help with recruitment. And other events that we let participants know about that might be happening at ACT or in the community. We also want to continue to support other Totally Outright projects. So we had a great deal of support when we were starting the project from Vancouver. Some other folks who have started the program since have come to us and Vancouver, so whatever we can do along the way, we'd be glad to help. And of course, the longer-term goal is about eradicating HIV/AIDS among young gay and bi men. And we think we can do this with all the great work that's happening across the country, so we're going to continue to move in that direction. So thank you all so much. I know I was talking for quite a bit of time. I hope the colors on the screen were helpful when you were tired of hearing my voice for so long. Thanks for your attention.